If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm your host, Kathryn Hansen, and in this podcast, I share information and strategies to help you put an end to your binge eating. I hope that each episode helps you feel just a little more empowered and a little more capable of achieving recovery. Today, I'm going to be helping you become more aware of thoughts that may be leading you toward binge eating. As you know, if you've listened to the past episodes, that in the Brain Over Binge approach that I'm sharing in this podcast, I believe that the urges to binge are the direct cause of binge eating. And as a reminder, an urge to binge is any thought, feeling, or physical sensation that encourages binge eating. If you took away these thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations that are making you feel compelled to binge, you would not binge. There's nothing about your life circumstances or your stress level or your emotional state that makes you binge. It's only the urges to binge that are getting you to actually binge. The more you can become aware of your urges, the more you can see how they're operating and getting you to act. And then eventually you can avoid acting on them. There are some common patterns of thought that binge eaters often have. I've talked previously about one last time thoughts, and this was in episode 14. One last time thoughts are probably the most common tempting thoughts that a binge eater may experience during an urge to binge. And these one last time thoughts are actually common in people with other bad habits and other addictions as well. And if you're interested in hearing that discussion, please go to episode 14. Today I'm going to address another common thought that may be encouraging you to binge against your better judgment. I'm going to talk about thoughts of making up for the binge or of compensating for the binge in some way. And let me explain a little deeper what I mean by that. The urges to binge are from the primitive brain or the lower brain. They're part of an instinctual drive or habitual drive, and often a little bit of both. Even though the urge is a primitive drive, it often comes with some seemingly logical thoughts, giving you what sometimes feel like valid reasons to give in to the urge. One last time thoughts are common, like I mentioned, when you hear in your head, I'll just do this one more time and then never do it again. Another common thought is what I'm talking about today, and it's something like this. Just binge now and then tomorrow you can make up for it. Or, you can binge now and then eat less all week to compensate. Or if you're someone who purges in a more extreme way, these thoughts might tell you that you can get rid of the food afterward by self-induced vomiting, or that you can lose weight you gain from a binge by severely overexercising. I want to stop and say that purging behaviors are dangerous. And if you're engaged in self-induced vomiting or laxative use or extreme overexercise or dieting, you should be monitored by a medical professional. Like I say at the end of every podcast, what I'm sharing with you does not take the place of medical advice. I just wanted to make sure I share that with you before continuing the conversation. Because today I'm talking about purging from the angle of it being a sort of excuse to binge. Once purging or another form of compensation for the binge gets repeated enough times, it becomes part of the habit as well. And your brain will automatically suggest it. Your brain will suggest it in a way that makes you feel like it would be okay to binge because you can just purge afterward. Thoughts like you can just make up for the binge often strongly encourage the binge. To avoid binge eating, it's necessary to avoid giving thoughts like this value. And it's important to stop letting thoughts of purging encourage you to follow the urge to binge. The thoughts of compensating for a binge by dieting or exercising or possibly by self-induced vomiting may have started off as conscious thoughts, likely at a time when the urges to binge first appeared in your life. When you first started feeling such a strong compulsion to binge, which was probably after a period of dieting, it was likely so uncomfortable that it seemed to make sense for you to try to come up with reasons to give in. You may have rationalized acting on them by saying something like, okay, I'll just give in now and then I'll do something to compensate for it later. But as your binge and purge cycle repeated, thoughts about purging or compensating for the binge, which may have started off as a conscious thought, likely became habitual and began automatically appearing each time you had a binge urge. When I was a binge eater, I purged with extreme exercise. And I remember when I'd have binge urges, this thought of, I can just do a bunch of exercise tomorrow to make up for it, this was often a tipping point where I'd decide to act on the urge and begin a binge. I'd sometimes go so far as to mentally plan the next day's exercise before I followed the urge. Promising myself that I'd compensate often seemed to give me the green light to binge. And at the time, I didn't know that giving in was giving in to my lower brain. But after the binge, I would always regret it. I hated exercising excessively. I always wished I had not binged in the first place. The purge did not erase the pain or the shame of the binge. It was an illusion that purging would erase this pain. It only gave me more pain and made everything worse. But during the binge urge, my thoughts made over-exercising seem so easy. I would have thoughts like, just binge and then you can work out tomorrow. It will be no big deal. You don't have much to do tomorrow anyway. Those thoughts were purely neurological junk. I never woke up in the morning after a binge and gladly put on my workout clothes and headed to the gym. It was pure misery every time. It was not easy. It was not what I wanted to be doing that day, even though during the binge urge, my lower brain made it seem like no big deal. I knew rationally that I wanted to stop my purging behavior as well as my binging behavior. And it was only during the binge urge that I had thoughts telling me that purging was a solution. It was definitely not a solution, and it's not a solution for you either. The solution is not to binge in the first place. And if you do binge, to know that purging only makes it worse, and it puts your health in danger. It's important to understand that even if you know your purging behaviors are unhealthy and you want to stop them, during a binge urge, the purge thoughts will still automatically come up, and they'll make purging seem like no big deal. The key is to be able to recognize this pattern, and to recognize that these are faulty thoughts, and that you can dismiss them, and you need to learn to dismiss them in the moments of an urge. Thoughts that encourage purging will often give you the message that a purge or some form of compensation for the binge will undo the damage of a binge. But when you're not feeling tempted to binge, you can see how false this thought is, because of course a purge does not undo any damage. It actually does the opposite. It causes severe damage to your health and to your life. A purge does not rectify a wrong. A purge is an additional wrong. It's an additional source of suffering. During binge urges, thoughts about purging can make it seem like repeating this binge-purge cycle one more time will be harmless. But you know that it's not harmless. You know it's causing damage in your life, and you know it's not what you truly want to be doing. Like any thought that makes binge eating seem appealing, thoughts that use purging as a reason to binge need to be dismissed. So just try to notice when you have these type of thoughts. You don't have to argue with the thoughts about purging or compensating for the binge. Just recognize them in that moment. Just seeing the thoughts for the habitual neurological junk that they are can immediately give those type of thoughts less power. See if you can experience those thoughts without immediately believing them, or without letting them become an excuse to binge. Once your urge to binge subsides and goes away, you'll be so glad that you did not act on it, and that you don't have to deal with the pain and the shame of the binge. And you'll also be so glad that you don't have to deal with feeling like you need to compensate or make up for the binge in some way. It's such a relief when you truly know you don't have to binge or purge. That's all for this discussion. I hope that it helps you become more aware of your own patterns and the thoughts that get you to act on binge urges. I also hope that it helps you avoid harmful purging behaviors as well. Before I end today, I want to invite you to get my free ebook, The Brain Over Binge Basics, which guides you through the 5 components of dismissing binge urges. It can help you get some momentum in recovery and start feeling like you have control of this behavior rather than it controlling you. I also want to mention that there will be a special episode released tomorrow because Cookie Rosenblum and I are starting our 8-week group course again on August 21st, and we want to tell you more about that. I put a link in the show notes for you to get all the details about the 8-week group course and see if it's something that might feel right for you. We both love working with the men and women in our group course and helping to guide them on a path to freedom from this problem. If you're interested in hearing more about it, tune in tomorrow to hear the special episode. I want to thank you for being here today, and I hope that you'll join Cookie and I tomorrow, or that you'll join me again in 2 weeks for the next regularly scheduled episode. I also want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.